You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph, and as always on a Monday, I'm joined here with Chris Johnson. How's it going today, Chris?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad myself. But look, the last time we spoke, we broke down some of the comments from John Lynch, but Kyle Shanahan, he spoke on Tuesday, so I haven't had a chance to discuss it with you yet. I had a solo vid later in the week where I kind of went on a little rant.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious to know what you thought about Kyle Shanahan's comments regarding the quarterback position.
Yeah, well, so not to, just echo, some of the stuff that you said before, not just last week, but prior. For one, I'm not so hung up on the addition of Sam Darnold. As we talked about before, it was going to be somebody, right? I know some people are really hung up on the fact of who Sam Darnold is, how he's played so far in his career and such, which I get all of that. But we need to secure another quarterback who is going to be okay being worst case a number three, quarterback in the room. Also, really, I think it boils down to if you believe Kyle Shanahan or not. And I do, in this respect, okay. I do. Because the reality is, I think he was a little more transparent than John Lynch was, talking about the availability of Brock Purdy, not knowing what his availability would be. He said, hey, he could be ready, he could be not ready, whatever. So in that case, you need to have another functional quarterback or viable quarterback, I guess you can say. Now, could Shanahan's perceptions of Sam Darnold be kind of like influencing the fact that, he feels comfortable with Sam Darnold, a quarterback room with Sam Darnold and Trey Lance until Brock's ready? Maybe. It's been said that Shanahan has liked Darnold for a while, so that could be the case. But I do believe the fact that, you're basically insulating yourself in the event that Brock can't go right away. You have another quarterback that you can play with, and they believe in that being Trey Lance and then Sam Darnold as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is as it relates to the splitting of the reps, I do understand the heartburn there a little bit because, you want your starter, I don't care how many years they are in the league, you want your starter to be able to get the majority or lion's share of the reps with the ones. And then, of course, with Trey Lance being in such a critical time in his own development, right? Ideally, we would want him taking all those first team reps. But on the same token, we have no idea what that looks like, right? No one said it was 50-50. No one said it was going to be anywhere close to that. Is it good? I personally have always thought, and I'm not speaking just, out of convenience here, but I think it's always good for the, second team quarterback to get some run with the first team. That's, we've seen that before, not just with the Niners, but when the starting quarterback goes down, you hear all this. They need to build chemistry with the first team. They haven't gotten reps with the first team, so on and so forth. So I think it's a solid practice to do that. And we have to remain, it remains to be seen what that looks like. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's good. The circumstance, I think prepares the team to be able to weather the circumstance if Brock can't go right away. You got Sam Darnold, you got Trey Lance. I still believe that Trey Lance beats Sam Darnold in any kind of competition. I don't care if it's for the one, if it's for the two, whatever. And it'll just play out how it does.
Theoretically, he should, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that, in March, when Kyle Shanahan said these things in March, right? Like we're talking about splitting those first team reps between Lance and Darnold. I guess I found that interesting because it seems like there's a plan for those two guys to compete for who's going to be QB1 while Brock Purdy is out. I found that interesting because Kyle Shanahan said nothing has changed with how he feels towards Trey Lance. But Trey Lance was QB1 to start the season over Jimmy Garoppolo last season. So something must have changed where now he's splitting carries with Sam Darnold until Brock Purdy is back. Now, I totally understand why Brock Purdy is QB1 until he's, healthy again. Or sorry, not until, but when he's healthy again, he will be QB1. I totally understand that. He played, his ass off. He deserves it. But I guess I don't really understand the rush to say this is going to be a competition, but I know that the 49ers, Kyle, John, they both have said, and not just for the quarterback position, but for all positions, we love competition. Competition is good. So I guess that's fine. To your point, Chris, I mean, Trey Lance should theoretically be able to beat out Sam Darnold. I did feel like Sam Darnold looked better with the Panthers, this past season. It was a small sample size for him in Carolina, but I think there is something that the 49ers will be able to do with him where he can look serviceable. I can see that happening, right? Bottom line is, both of these guys, Lance and Darnold, former first round picks, right? So the talent is there, I think. I think Trey Lance has more of the athletic tools um, to, piece something together to maybe overtake Darnold. But at the end of the day, they're both first round picks, right? So, but all this talk about the 49ers kind of not prioritizing Trey Lance's development anymore, as Albert Breer said, and I talked about it in my video last week. I think it begs the question: well, if you know that you want to move forward with Brock Purdy being your starting quarterback, how about trade Trey Lance? Right, like that's now what the talk around Trey Lance has shifted to, trading him.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think makes sense because, okay, if you know you're not going to play him and you gave up all that to draft him in the first place, what are you doing? So it makes sense that the questions are coming up. Now, personally, I don't know if it makes sense to trade him this season. That, in my personal opinion, for a couple of reasons. One being, you're not completely sure what Sam Darnold is going to look like, and you're not completely sure what Brock Purdy is going to look like after he comes back from his injury. Right? Is he going to be ready to play right away? Is he going to be returned to performance right away? These are all questions that I think we won't really have the answer to until way later, September maybe, end of August maybe. But, because I've seen some people throwing out the idea of trading Trey Lance this draft, and
Right.
I don't think that would be very wise. I understand why the discussion of trading Trey Lance is a topic. I think it makes sense as a topic, but not any time before August, September, just because of everything going on. I also think his dead cap hit would be around 11 million if it's before June 1st, right? June 1st.
You're totally correct. And it's 5.5 after that.
Yeah. So based on all of this, I don't think the 49ers would want to trade Lance this draft, right? After, sure, it's on the table for sure. But I don't think it happens before that. And another reason, and Matt Barrows highlighted this reason, you want to have Lance's value go up a bit. Right now, his value is shot. I mean, it's zero. So your hope is he can go through this offseason, look decent. Hey, maybe he is QB1 until Brock Purdy is back. That also raises his value. Of course, if he doesn't win the competition against Darnold, his value will take a hit, right? But the hope for the 49ers, if they eventually wish to trade Lance, is for him to regain some value. And the only way they're going to do that is by having him show what he can do, even if it's a small sample size through this offseason, show what he can do as the lead guy and then go from there. But I don't see it happening before that because I frankly don't think there will be another team that would be willing to give up anything near what would make it worth it for the 49ers.
I agree. I don't have much even to add to that. No, I totally agree. But there will be some I think key dates to keep our eyes on, right? Like, certainly June 1st. Then the trade deadline, whenever it is this upcoming season, it's always around like Halloween or something. Those will be the key dates to, and there might be movement before then, but I think that it'll be interesting because because if Trey is on the team beyond the trade deadline in this upcoming season, then they have to make the decision by about May 1st next year about picking up his 5th-year option. So so we'll have some decisions. To me, I'm like a day-by-day person with some of these things, right? I know some people are getting real, and it's easy to do. It's not football, and you kind of get caught up in the echo chamber of all that's going on Twitter and in the media and so on. So you think about it a lot. But with some of these decisions, to me, it's more like, let's just see what it's like tomorrow. Let's just see, take it day by day. Because there's no sense getting all bad shape about it, right? And say, oh, I think Trey's gonna get traded or whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, come to find out Brock has a setback and came and play, for the first 2 months of the season or something. So yeah, I just say let's wait and see.
It's all a fluid situation. Yeah. I mean, from here until September at least. I mean, it's always a fluid situation, but you don't start making those. Team. I don't think you start making those decisions until the season starts at the very earliest, I think. But
for sure,
it's definitely something to consider. That's not a surprise. Now, another 2 players that I think have been brought up as potential trade candidates are Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Now, Brandon Ayuk, he's due for an extension here soon. Deebo Samuel already has his extension. So you can look at both players, I think, and make a case for either of those guys being traded and why the 49ers would want to trade them. We talked about this last week, Chris, and we were thinking about, okay, if it's Deebo, if you had to pick between Deebo and Ayuk, we would pick Ayuk, right? But I can also see the scenario in which you would pick Deebo just because he already has the extension, and Ayuk, if he got the extension too, that would bring his cost up probably even higher than Deebo's, just because like the market continues to go up every year. Although to this point, Ayuk hasn't really had a big season like the one Deebo had that got him paid. You know what I mean? Yep. Ayuk, however, is an ascending player, and clearly, I think, and we could speculate on Ayuk's tweet where some people were thinking that, oh, this has something to do with negotiations. We can make the argument that Ayuk feels like he should be getting paid this much. And, maybe the 49ers don't reach that number, in which case, kind of like Deebo, maybe he would want to be traded. So he gets that number. I can see both scenarios, I guess, playing out, but I feel like, and I'll say it again, I feel like the Christian McCaffrey trade made Deebo Samuel's skill set, those skill sets overlap, Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel, to an extent. So I think that makes Deebo Samuel a little more expendable in that sense, more so than Brandon Ayuk. So I'm going to stick to that, but I could definitely see it from both sides, how that could potentially happen for either player.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And honestly, I think you were the first person that I heard say that and make that realization about the skill sets that that Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey have, and kind of how they're similar in that regard. So shout out to you, because I'm hearing other people saying that now more. I agree. I think that there's some dates associated with this conversation also, right? So Deebo's cap hit before June 1st is absolutely insane. It's $28 million, but his goes down to 6.5 after June 1st. And then Brandon Ayuk, his cap hit after June 1st is 1.6 if he's traded. But prior to that, it's the exact same. So So Ayuk's cap hit, dead money, excuse me, is the exact same before or after June 1st. What's interesting for me is that they haven't picked up his 5th-year option yet. I mean, that's maybe I know the Niners, again, not trying to get all emotional about it. The Niners do kind of take their time with these things for one reason or another. That's just the culture. That's how it works. But they haven't picked up his 5th-year option. They have until May 1st. Last Monday at the owners' meetings, John Lynch kind of said, I'd be surprised if we didn't, which is kind of interesting because he runs the shop, right? So he runs the front office in that regard, right? So, if you'd be surprised, tell us, give us some indication as to what that is. But at any rate, yeah. So I'm with you. I think that Brandon Ayuk is the ascending player. We may have seen Debo's ceiling, and even if he does get back to that ceiling, that's amazing. But reality is, as far as pure receiver and receiver type things, Ayuk does those better. And yeah, I agree. We can get more of that out of Christian McCaffrey. So. Yeah, Debo's going to cost $28 million against the cap. No, that's absolutely correct. I'm looking at over the cap right now,
and I think that's why they kind of structure some of these deals a certain way, because I think they have this thing where they like to kick the can down the road and say, okay, let's reassess in 2 years. We'll give you this contract. We're going to make the first couple years, team friendly, and then it's just going to keep escalating. We're going to decide if we want to keep you beyond that at that point or before that happens. So yeah, they have decisions to make, but to Jedi's point here, Debo's contract is going to get real large soon. And that may make it harder to trade Debo, honestly. But at the same time, I just feel like there's so many teams who look for a Debo in the draft. Oh, we want a Debo. Imagine all the things you can do with this type of player. There's been no other Debo that has come out in the last few years. And so in that sense, I think there are some desperate teams who have money usually that would take that swing, So it would be interesting, but I think most likely out of all the players that we're talking about today, I feel like either one of those guys is probably going to get traded at some point. I don't know why. I just feel that there's no way I can see the 49ers extending 2 of their wide receivers, and that's just it's so much money allocated to one position. And I'll also say I think the 49ers could take advantage of the fact that Ayuk is still an ascending player and he hasn't had the crazy year that Debo had, right? He has another year to, kind of, I guess, prove himself and see what he can do. But again, I think they can use that to their advantage in wanting to get a more favorable deal, I think, for Ayuk than they got with Debo.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think you're right. You're spot on as it relates to having that perspective regarding, either, Samuel or Ayuk getting traded at some point. I mean, when you just look at how the team does business, if someone's going to get paid, it's typically like a person in that position group, right? And they try to get a little bit cheaper, everywhere else in that position group, right? So if the past is history, that gives, if the past gives us, a foresight into the future or whatever, that's going to be the case probably with Debo and Brandon Ayuk also. I think that, beyond just the cap hit aspect, well, I think that is the big aspect of it, the cap hit, dead money, as it relates to Debo Samuel. I think that it allows you to reset in that position. But the interesting thing is, for one, and we can talk about this specifically, as the summer goes on, but well, not too much further. I guess the draft is is coming up pretty quick here. But at any rate, I think they're going to probably get a receiver in the draft, not just because of the Debo and Ayuk situation or circumstance. I think last year was the first draft in I can't remember, 15 drafts or something. We can look that up, that the Niners didn't take a receiver somewhere in the draft. And so they're going to, and of course that goes well beyond, the Shanahan and Lynch era. But then also I think that, in regard to not knowing what, Danny Gray looks like, Juwan Jennings is a solid 3, but as it relates to that kind of Debo, Brandon Ayuk, number one, number two type receiver, someone that can fill in and be a playmaker in that regard. Don't see that happening in free agency. So they're probably going to go into the draft to do that. And if Shanahan, feels that Danny Gray's taking a step, or he looks, better than last year, I guess you can say, more involved in the game plan and in the system. Also with, going and drafting a player, I can definitely see one of those guys getting moved sooner than later. So they probably have a plan for it. It'll definitely send shockwaves whenever it happens. I just hope those guys don't stay in the NFC.
Yeah, and this is kind of a make or break year for Danny Gray, right? And that's silly to say when he's only, it's a sophomore year. But I feel like Kyle Shanahan has little patience for offensive players who he drafts early or early enough. I know he was a 5th round selection, but even still, I think there were some high hopes for him. So if he doesn't look to take a step this season, I think it's not looking great for him. I think he was always kind of a one-trick pony. I hate to think that that's true, but that's what it looks like so far, right? And I think there are other factors as to, I think, why he wasn't really getting on the field. But to your point, Juwan Jennings, last year of his contract. So regardless, I think even regardless of what happens with Debo Ayuk, they're going to look for a slot receiver, especially if Danny Gray doesn't take that next step, right? So, yeah, they're definitely going to draft a wide receiver. Speaking of the draft, the 49ers are looking at a lot of running backs as well, from what I've noticed. Izzy Abanikanda from Pitt, who I think his projection is like day 2, sometime in day 2. So, or a little earlier than you would have thought the 49ers would be looking at a running back, right? They've also spoken with Travis Dye at a USC. Let's see. I'm looking at my list here. A couple other guys, Titus Swen out of Wyoming could be a day 3 guy. Eric Ray, probably a day 3 guy. Sean Tucker out of Syracuse. Keaton Mitchell, some of the guys that they've met with at the Combine. Cameron Peoples was one who I posted a little bit ago that was reported. Tony Pauline said the 49ers met with him at his pro day. So basically, the 49ers are meeting with running backs, which, you don't leave any stone unturned preparing for the draft, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to draft one. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll draft one early or at all, right? But they're looking at it, and it kind of begs me to wonder, what is the running back room going to look like next season? Because as we know, Christian McCaffrey, he's the top guy, and he's so good. You don't really need much else, right? We saw Elijah Mitchell come back, get hurt again, come back, get hurt again. And this kind of seems like the trend with Elijah Mitchell. Such a talented player. This team loves him and what he does on the field, but unfortunately, he's not available as much as the team would like. He would be an incredible complement to Christian McCaffrey, but for the reasons of, availability is the best ability, right? That seems to be lacking with Elijah Mitchell. And I kind of feel like he might be a trade candidate because he's nearing his time. I'm trying to think like when his contract is up too. You could pull it up, Chris, but I feel like Kyle Shanahan doesn't linger too much with his running backs. He's kind of like, all right, I'm going to run you to the ground and I'm going to move on to the next. It's cutthroat the way that he deals with his running backs, especially the guys that he got day 3, undrafted free agents. You try to flip that as much as you can to some value. So he did it last season with Jeff Wilson. And so I could totally see it happening. Breida, I think, was kind of a similar situation as well a couple years ago. So I think Elijah Mitchell is probably up next for potential trade candidate in the running back room. I also think Ty Davis Price, I think they're going to give him another year to see what he can do, but that could be a scenario like Trey Sermon where, all right, we've seen enough after 2 off seasons, right, of, seeing what he can do or not do. Ty Davis Price. It seems like they like Ty Davis Price a little more than they like Trey Sermon, though.
I'd agree with that.
So I think they'll give him a little more time. But Elijah Mitchell, not so much because they don't like him, because I think they love him. But I think because availability, and I think because right now they're at a time where they can probably get something out of him. There's a lot of Kyle Shanahan disciples out there who would be happy to have a Kyle Shanahan running back on their team. You know what I mean? So case in point, all the running backs that have gone to the Dolphins.
Miami, yeah.
So yeah, I feel like Elijah Mitchell could be next. But what do you think in this running back room? Who's the easy target there?
I agree with you. I think if we had to pick an easy target, I would say Elijah Mitchell. His contract is up at the end of 2024. Since I forgot he got drafted. He got drafted in the 6th round. I thought he was undrafted, but so he has a 4-year deal. So the 2024 season is his last year. I would agree with you, Steph. I mean, I think really a couple things to take into consideration, right, is the type of runners that they are, first of all. So I think like Ty Davis Price and Jordan Mason are probably more similar in that regard. Elijah Mitchell can do the outside zone probably better than they do. So, ultimately, if they're going to move on from Elijah Mitchell, I think that there'd be a touch of a replacement there in some capacity, probably a draft, a player that was drafted or something. But I agree, and it's unfortunate as it relates to Mitchell's career so far. I mean, I will say, I think it was in the Bears game is when he hurt his MCL or whatever. That hit, I mean, shoot, I'm surprised he didn't tear his ACL on that. He was planted and got hit from the side. Someone was tackling him or whatever. So, and he went down with that. And I can't remember what his injury was late in the year and why he missed the NFC Championship game. But regardless, it was another injury. So I could certainly see, because of his availability, that being a consideration. And then, getting some draft capital back for him. He might be someone that's moved during the draft, right? So I could certainly see that. And, it all depends on, again, how they are feeling about, Jordan Mason and Ty. TDP. But I think that it's so precarious with our running backs. And I say these particular ones because, Christian McCaffrey did play all of his games last year when he was both with the Niners and Carolina, but he does have his history.
Yeah,
Elijah Mitchell has his history. So, it's about reinforcing that room as well, to a level that you're comfortable with. So obviously, if Elijah Mitchell were to be moved, we would definitely need someone that we feel that could be, impactful on day one, to give, because I don't want Christian McCaffrey, getting like 20, 25 touches a game. You know what I'm saying? So that'll be an interesting one to watch as well. And then, do we have anyone on the do we have any running backs on the practice squad? I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Because I was thinking about if there were any.
Mason was, but then he ended up getting to the 53. Yeah, so
that's right. Okay. Yeah.
Which I like Mason, and a lot of people do, right? So I wouldn't hate it if he got, a little extra opportunity. And so, and to your point, the running backs, they go through them. Christian McCaffrey has a history of injuries as well. That's why I think they do draft running back either day 3 or, probably looking at a UDFA, as they always do, right? So,
and they battle it out.
And it works. It works for them. At least the late round guys.
No, for sure.
Early selections haven't seemed to have worked for whatever reason, but those late guys, for whatever reason, those just always seem to work out. So if the 49ers want to do that again, they can. So we'll see. But on this topic of, who are some trade candidates, right? I did a poll on the YouTube comments here, and I'm going to check in on them right now and see what people think. So I asked, which 49ers most likely to be traded. Looks like most people say Mitchell or Ty Davis Price. I gave the option of Kittle, which we haven't talked about yet.
No, we haven't.
Debo or Ayuk, Mitchell or TDP or other. Say it in the chat. So Justin here decided to put it in the chat. Armstead in a defensive line heavy draft. That's an interesting one. Jedi's point was Armstead cost a small country. The team will have to have like 25 million in cap space that narrows down the field. Is Armstead good enough that for his cap value, would a team be okay with, spending that much? And we're talking about a pick and what he costs, his contract, right? Like, is he that good? Is he seen as being that good for a team to take that on? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, though. Just to provide some additional insight there. So if Armstead's traded before June 1st, his dead cap is 21 million. After June 1st, it's 7.3. But this team drafts for the future too, right? So along that same thought process, I can see a potential circumstance where we move up for a D lineman, and then maybe Armstead's year to get moved is next year. So
move up for a D lineman again?
Maybe. That's what they want to do. They like to build from inside out, especially with that D line. That's their emphasis. So, but because those bills are going to start coming due, and they will have to start getting cheaper in some of those positions and such. So, but the Kittle one that you added to that poll is legitimate. That's a legitimate consideration as well.
Let's talk about it, because the 49ers, for one, they're going to be looking at tight ends in this draft, this is a great draft to do it, right? It's a very deep tight end class. There's a lot of talent across the board. Like, literally, I think you can get quality from, day 1 to day 3. So in that sense, does this mean, for the same reasons we were talking about Debo, right? Does this mean that Kittle could potentially be a trade candidate down the line as well? Curious to know what you think, Chris.
I think so. I think so. But I see it in the sense that Kittle might be in a circumstance I can see the team, and it's just a feeling. I can see the team doing it similarly to like a Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, where his heir apparent will be on the team before he gets traded, because I think that Shanahan definitely wants to have the tight end in his game plan. They've got to be able to block. That they've got to be able to block. And he wants to be able to deploy them as another option in the passing game. So Kittle getting traded without there being, say, an obvious, replacement for tight end 1, I don't see that happening. But I do believe that they would go to the draft. They would pick someone up in the draft to see what they've got. Steph, I meant to talk to you about this, I think last week or maybe the week before, but I still wish that I'm still hoping for another like strong pass catching tight end, right? Like I envisioned and had dreams of like 2 tight end sets and stuff. And we had Jordan, what's the guy that we had a couple years ago, the tight end? He and Kittle were hurt all at the same time. But the guy that was a former tight end for the Washington Commanders.
Yeah. God, what
Jordan
is
Reed.
his name?
Jordan Reed,
Jordan Reed. There you go.
Yeah, so
he's a very talented guy. Just always hurt.
Yeah, he always had those concussions. But I think that would be a dimension to this offense. I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about, OBJ or some other high, big name receiver or whatever. DeAndre Hopkins is getting released or whatever. Imagine a second tight end, strong, pass catching tight end, and 2 tight end sets in this offense. I think that would be awesome. Anyway, so that being said, I can envision us identifying that person and having them on the team first, and then maybe passing the torch, because Kittle provides a lot of cap savings if he were to be traded after June 1st. But I don't know if Tyler Croft is. Not Tyler Croft. I don't know if what's the guy, Ross Dwelly, is going to assume that role.
No,
in that regard. I hoped it. I wished it for him. I wanted to see him get
me too.
but I
He's
feel
not
like
good.
he was out of the game plan a lot last year. So
right, he's definitely not. He's not that guy. He's not that guy. And I just want to point out too that like all of these scenarios, it we're not necessarily thinking that all of these may happen this season.
sure,
May also happen next year. I think Kittle is one of those guys that I don't see that happening this season.
right.
And to your point, um, you want to see whatever tight end they draft get integrated into this system, and then see what that guy is capable of. Because I think for tight ends, much like other positions in this league, it it takes a lot for tight ends to catch on in this league where like they develop into a starter. So I think because of that, I don't think I'd be very short-sighted for the 49ers to trade Kittle before seeing whoever they draft in, take on a larger role and feel confident that they can take on a larger role, right? So,
Oh, for sure.
but I've been asking for two tight end sets and a good two tight end set, not Kittle and Dwelly, not Kittle and Warner. I've been wanting like a quality pass catching tight end who can also block.
Me too.
Just like a Kittle, a mini Kittle, like just just copy and paste him if you could. And I know Kittle's one of a kind, but like I said, this is a great draft class for tight ends. So I think if there's any time to find a guy who you can have two tight end sets with, who you can eventually maybe replace Kittle with, I think it'll be in this draft. And it would not surprise me if after like UDFA signings, if the 49ers have two or three tight ends, as part of the 90 whatever man roster, right?
I
Just
do got a
because
question for you along those lines, Steph, regarding tight ends. I know you've been doing a lot of draft prep work, and for anyone listening that hears this or whatever, Steph's work in that regard is deluxe. So you got to check that out. But as far as tight ends and such, is there anyone in mind that aside from the ones from Georgia, but those guys are going to be off the board before we draft. But are there any additional? I know it's a deep class, but are there any additional names to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, there's a few guys that I would, feel great about if the 49ers drafted them. Davis Allen out of Clemson, Sam Laporta out of Iowa, like that's kind of an obvious one. Him and Kittle kind of cut from the same cloth, mm-hmm. Right? TEU. So I think that'd be a good option. Sam Laporta, I don't know where he'll go, right? The fact that it's such a deep tight end class, maybe that can push talent down the board, and maybe he can go in the third. I don't know, but I feel like he'd probably go in the second. Then there's Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion. Probably a guy who can go early day 3, but talented. He's out of I already said he's out of Old Dominion, but he turned a lot of heads at the combine. Brenton Strange out of Penn State, a great guy who can do both as well, catching and blocking. So he, I think, would be a great fit for the 49ers. Also, Braden Willis out of Oklahoma is another guy who I think could potentially be that guy, because when I asked him if he had met with the 49ers at the combine, he unprompted said, "I love them, they love me." And so he added there could be a relationship there in the future, but we'll just have to see. I thought that was like, I was like, oh, really? I just asked if you had met with them.
Yep.
But so yeah, I think that could be an option as well. But those are some names that also Mallory. I think it's Will Mallory, right, out of Miami, I think. So there's so many guys that I think fit what the 49ers would be looking for, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about this draft to see who they come away with, because I've been wanting this for a long time.
I am too, and I think that the decisions, I think, will provide some clarity even to like this conversation we're having today about potential trade targets, right? And or trade candidates, excuse me, because I don't see us waiting for that first pick. I can see us moving up, right? And I think that the guys that the team goes to get, that they move up for. This isn't always the case because I think they moved up for Trey Sermon even, but I think that a player that they move up for, that'll probably give us some indication as to what they're thinking about that, not just that player, but that overall position group.
I think if they move up, it's going to be for a tackle, just because it's hard.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
hard to
right.
find. It's hard to find a starting or just quality tackle.
And you got to draft for the future.
Yeah. And, to that point, Jedi was asking, do you think Trent is playing for one last shot at the ring, or he hangs them up regardless?
Yeah. So
that's, I think he's saying next season. Would he retire after this? Well, I guess it would be after this season because he was already mulling retirement after the NFC Championship loss, right? So the point is, it's coming up. Like Trent, his time as a 49er, as a football player in the NFL, it's coming close to being over, right? So yeah, Jedi says right after this coming season. So they have to plan for that as well. I mean, not just looking at right tackle, and maybe they do feel good about Colton McKivitz, where whoever the tackle they do draft, maybe they are thinking about it being the Trent replacement more so than McGlinchey, like we don't know. But the point is they're going to have to look at it. So I think they're going to trade up for a tackle personally. If they do trade up, which I think they would. But I shared this earlier. The 49ers have, as far as their value of the picks, 49ers have 11 picks in this draft, right? But as far as the value of those picks, they are the lowest. They have the lowest draft capital value of this draft. Just because they don't have a lot of picks in the first 3 rounds, and those picks aren't the most valuable either. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they maneuver. Not saying that it's impossible, but I think it'll take multiple picks to move up, which they've done it before, right? So we'll see.
Picks are players.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, Jedi says, I think we see the small retool of the roster when Trent hangs them up. Players like Juice, yeah. That's an interesting one too. Like at some point they have to start looking at Juice replacements, right? You haven't had to think about that quite yet, but that's coming at some point as well. So I think the 49ers definitely have some decisions to make about their future. And it'll be interesting to see how they navigate it. They built this, brick by brick. Could they keep it up? That's the question. Like as some of these bricks start moving out, like will they have good plans to keep that going? That'll be the question they have to hit on the draft. It is the main thing, or it's going to be very, very difficult. And they have, they've gotten some good value picks in the draft, but they'll have to keep hitting, to remain successful and to be able to replace some of these guys who are eventually going to be either getting traded, either going to go to free agency, either going to be retiring. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years for the 49ers. The good thing is, the way they see it, they're not spending a lot of money on their quarterback position.
Right.
And that helps them, fill other needs. So that's the strategy that they're going with. But, I think this is a good topic. Just for shits and giggles, I wanted to go over this last topic, and that is one that keeps coming up. And I don't know how serious or unserious it is, but it's Kirk Cousins to the 49ers, because Florio, we all love Mike Florio, right? He said that at the combine there was some noise, some chatter among people within the broader league structure. He said it wasn't the media, but within the broader league structure, people in the league, we're talking about Cousins being traded to the 49ers. Do you think there's anything to this, or is this just people like speculating because everyone knows Kyle Shanahan loves him some Cousins?
Yeah.
Okay, I shouldn't say that. Loves him some Kirk. That sounded wrong. It sounded like he's into some incest stuff. I didn't mean that.
No, you're all good. No, I feel you. I mean, yeah, I think there is, and mainly more so for the standpoint of like, just because someone says something doesn't make it true, but I think it's an open secret, right? Or not even maybe secret that Shanahan has an affinity for Kirk Cousins and such. So I don't doubt that people have said it or it's been said, whether it was in tongue in cheek or there's some legitimacy to it. I hope not. I mean, and it would go against, I think, everything that the team has been about or they've been saying publicly for the last year or two about how, even last week at the owners' meetings, both Shanahan and Lynch in different times spoke about how they constructed this roster in this way and, making these decisions based on having a rookie quarterbacks on rookie deals or a cost-effective quarterback room. And even they explicitly kind of spoke to that, when they thought that they were moving on from Jimmy the first time. I think in the exit interview with the media, Shanahan spoke to it being a salary cap league or something like that. So that was kind of his public reasoning for why they were kind of making the decisions that they were making, in addition to Jimmy's availability. But aside from that being said, I mean, getting Kirk would be, expensive. Like, and I don't know that the value would be there, or that you would move the needle much more with the Kirk Cousins than what you potentially have already in your quarterback room. I think he would probably be a more efficient quarterback than, say, what Sam Darnold has shown thus far. And then simply put, with obviously Trey Lance and Brock Purdy, you just don't know from a long-term standpoint what you've got there. So I don't know that it's there. The value is there enough to make that move.
Yeah, I don't think so too. I mean, I don't doubt that Kyle Shanahan loves Cousins, is still going to love him. It's almost like what could have been. And so I think that's why that's the talk around league circles. It doesn't surprise me. If anything, it might be a running joke. But for the same reason, because the 49ers have been asked about Lamar Jackson as well, right? For the same reasons that I don't think they would pursue Lamar Jackson, and they've said they won't. It doesn't make sense to pursue Kirk Cousins either, right? So I agree with you. They're done spending a lot of money on the quarterback position just because they have so many other positions to allocate money to now. And it's kind of like over time, you have to reallocate that money elsewhere. Like, sometime in the future, they're going to be ready to allocate more money to the quarterback position because another position is going to be mostly rookies, or,
totally.
As of right now, the quarterback position is going to be mostly rookies or guys on like cheap contracts. So Jedi says here, if Kirk wants to come in for Purdy money, sure, he can come compete, but not dropping any real cap space on him. And we know that's not the case. Cousins is going to cost some money, right? And cost some picks, right? Yeah. So I don't see it happening for that.
Kirk's game checks are more than Purdy money. Seriously, he's getting bread.
Yeah, so I don't see it happening. It's funny to talk about, just because it seems like it comes up every freaking year. But I don't think it's anything in truth, because Flory is the only guy who has said it. Like, why hasn't anyone else talked about it?
I have looked into that too. I mean, I say looked into it, but I've done, some looking around and such in addition to Florio's comments, and there really hasn't been much of a buzz in that regard. I was surprised though to hear that, but so hopefully, because we couldn't find stuff about it, there's not much of a chatter. Maybe it's not that realistic.
Yeah. So we'll see. Yeah, it might be a running joke. Who knows? I mean, if I was another team, or like,
I'd be saying, there goes Shanahan's boy.
I'd be cracking up about it. Like, and then Florio's probably just like, oh, okay.
Yep.
You might be taking it real serious, real literal. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't see it being anything that will actually happen.
Yeah.
If Kyle still wanted it to happen, wouldn't shock me, but it actually happening is a whole nother thing, which I don't see. So, but yeah, this has been a fun topic because talking about the future of this team, and it could get complicated here. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this year and the next few, to see if they can keep this going. It'll be really interesting to see how they do it. I'll be impressed if they're able to keep it going.
I will be too. I mean, you're right, because again, we've got some of those players from that 18-17 class that are getting a little older. Their cap hits are getting larger, like the Fred Warners. Armstead was there before then, obviously, but Kittle. So those bills are going to be coming due. You got Trent Williams, who also has his big cap hits, but then he's also getting older. So I think we're going to start seeing, which they've kind of already started doing, I think. I mean, when you think about, preparing for Lakeland Tomlinson's departure, preparing for Mike McGlinchey's departure, I think we've kind of seen that. And maybe even getting lucky, I guess maybe is the word, for like Emmanuel Mosley's departure, because I think their thought probably was Ambry Thomas, Samuel Womack, Diomado and Nord, we'll just see what happens. Hopefully one of those guys, is strong. And that's kind of what happened in that regard. So that being said, I think that, we've got to hit on this draft. I think, to keep the window open, if that makes sense, to have that, the people that you're going to, pass the torch off to keep the things rolling. One thing I did not see, and I'm going to look into this a little bit if I can before the next time that we talk, Steph, is I don't know if Rand took any of our like scouts or anything like that with him, or if anyone else.
That was a good question. That's a good question, because as I've been keeping track of the pro day attendance for the 49ers, what pro days they're going to and whatnot. As part of that, I got to know what the 49ers scouts look like, which for the most part I do. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of wondering, like, because I saw one of the scouts standing next to Rand at one of the pro days, and I was like, wait, is he with the Titans now? I don't think he was, but it made me wonder. It made me wonder. And then I looked at the 49ers site to see like if all those names are still the same, and they are. Okay. So I don't think he took any with him. But that was a good question. Who knows? What if he did?
Right. Because that is really kind of like personally where a lot of my confidence comes from as it relates to the team's ability to hit on some of those late round picks, even some of those, guys that we add to the roster, in the off season that end up, doing really well, or even those trades and such. There's clearly a lot of strength in that, scouting room. So,
and the 49ers,
you're right.
The 49ers haven't announced who is taking Rand's spot, right, for director of player personnel. So, that's still, who knows when they'll announce that, maybe after the draft. But I can't imagine that person isn't already in the building and helping for this draft, right? They kind of have to. So maybe they're just waiting until after to announce, but we'll see. Well, I gotta go, but you guys please enjoy the rest of your Monday. Chris, as always, thanks for joining me on a Monday, and we'll do it again next week, right?
You already know. You got to like and subscribe. Can't forget that.
Yes, sir. Like and subscribe. Talk to you guys later this week. I got some prospect interviews later this week, so make sure you guys check that out. For now, peace.